Welcome to another edition of Getting to Know Your Indiana Neighbor. Now, let me say up front, there's no way that I have the intellect and I am qualified to interview a Grammy award winning, world renowned conductor who's a major player in the symphony and the opera. But I did it anyway. And he's from your hometown, Patrick Summers. Patrick was in town recently as he was awarded the 2022 Lagote Schools Alumnus of the Year, the outstanding alumnus for Lagote Schools 2022. So I took the time to sit down with him. Most of our conversation centered around his time in Lagote, growing up, and his path to stardom in the arts world. So sit back and enjoy this once in a lifetime phenom from Martin County for sure. Getting to know your Indiana neighbor. We're getting to know Patrick Summers right now. Welcome to another Getting to Know Your Indiana Neighbor. And with us today is Patrick Summers. Now, Pat has made a trip back, a very brief trip back to his hometown of Lagote to receive the Lagote Schools Outstanding Alumnus Award tonight as we record this, just a couple of hours from right now. So, congratulations first, Patrick, on that.
Thank you.
Secondly, even with all of the accolades, all of the awards that you've received across the country, across the world, it still has to be special to know that your hometown and your class of 1981 is so supportive of you in your career.
It's extremely special, Greg. Very, very sweet and very meaningful to me, especially for a guy who never picked up a basketball.
In this town, right? Uh, for those of you who don't know Patrick, I'm going to give a real brief summary as I would know it, but I would encourage you, Google him, YouTube him, look on Wikipedia, and you'll be amazed that this young man, not as young as he used to be,
No.
but this young man right here is from our hometown with all of the accomplishments he's had. So the only brief way to introduce Patrick, in my mind, everything I read and everything I see, is one of the absolute elite conductors of our country and really of our generation. And this is from what I read, Patrick. And I know that might embarrass you a little bit, but everything I see, Patrick is just elite. And I know a lot of you are like me. And Patrick just said he didn't pick up a basketball. So he might not be as well known in this area as he is in San Francisco, in Houston, around the world. But some of you do know him from childhood, and we'll talk about his childhood in just a little bit. But he's worked with the San Francisco Opera, the Houston Opera, the Metropolitan Opera, even earned a Grammy, right? Where
Yes.
do you keep your Grammy?
It's on a shelf in my office. Yeah. Yeah.
And also around the world. I know we'll talk a little bit later, Patrick, about your experience in China
Mhm.
to an audience who had never experienced opera
Yeah,
before.
that was an extraordinarily formative thing for me very early in my career. In the 80s and 90s, I spent almost 2 months a year in China, in Shanghai, at Shanghai Conservatory. That was an extraordinary time. Changed the way I thought about everything, about music, shall we say.
That was in his career a little bit, but we're going to talk about before the professional career that Patrick made. And I guess I would ask, first of all, as we always do, let's start from the beginning, Patrick. Talk about who your parents were, who your siblings were, and what life was like for you as a young child growing up in Lagote, Indiana.
Yeah. Gosh, my parents, Bud and Grace, were World War II era,
Yeah.
Depression era people. I was very much from the September of their lives, shall we say. Our oldest brother Tony was born in 1944. I was born in 1963.
All right.
So I was one of those little surprises that came along. And my parents, I must say, they were extraordinary people because the passion that I had for being a musician and for having an artistic life was way not only out of their comfort zone, but out of their experience.
Mm-hmm.
So not only did they get this late in life child where, you know, their retirement was, you know, should have been an annual trip to Florida, and their retirement instead was a high school kid.
Mm-hmm.
That must have been very difficult for them, but that I was also, you know, really had my sights from a very early age, really had my sights on an artistic life of some kind that wasn't being a music teacher, which was the only kind of artistic life that they knew was possible. So I also, my dad's sister-in-law, my aunt Bertie Borders Summers,
Mm-hmm.
who some people may remember, who was an eccentric by any standard, by far the most eccentric person in our family, and very beloved to me. But she had a piano, and she taught me when I was about 3 years old. She taught me to read music. So music was a first language for me.
Mm.
I could read music before I could read the words under the music, and she was very formative for me. And interestingly, she was not a worldly person in any way. I don't think she was ever farther away from Lagote than like Niagara Falls. I mean, they didn't travel, but she somehow sensed in me a life that could be something other than what she had, or she was a big dreaming sort of personality, but never did it herself.
So some of your first memories of life were at the piano.
Oh, definitely. I couldn't even reach the pedals.
Well,
But
how
yeah,
did you learn to read music
she taught me. Yeah,
at the age of?
between 3 and 4.
Wow.
Yeah, and and I loved music so much that for me, my childhood in this little town was very musical because I sought out everyone I could find who either had a piano or had some kind of interest in music.
Mhm.
And when you seek that out, you find a lot of people. A lady who lived behind us. Oh, what's her name? It'll come to me.
Where did you grow up?
110 High Street.
High Street.
Yeah.
All right.
And a lady who lived behind me, Mike will remember her name, but she had a player piano and she played the piano herself. And I remember she said she was born in 1880, so she was from the 19th century.
Yeah.
And I heard her. I would go bother her almost every day. She lived right behind us, and gosh, I don't remember her name.
I probably know her as well.
Yes,
But I.
and she was incredible, and I sought out a bunch of people,
Mhm.
you know. But my Aunt Bertie was the big one. But my parents, just to get back to that, my parents were so supportive of a life that they knew would take me away from them, which is a very big thing for a parent to do, you know, extraordinary
Yeah.
thing for a parent to do.
So, and your siblings, I know you hardly knew Mike, probably, right?
Well, Tony, our oldest
Tony.
brother, who died
Yeah.
now 20, almost 26 years ago,
Mhm.
died in 1996. Tony, Tony was a geologist, scientist, worked at the San Francisco Academy of Sciences
Mhm.
from the 60s onward. Tony was the one I really didn't know very well
Yeah.
because he was gone by the time I was born. You know, he was in college by the time
Yeah.
I was born.
Yeah.
Mike, Mike came back here after service in Vietnam and the Philippines. He was in the Philippines during the Vietnam War. So by the late 60s, Mike was back here, and so I actually did grow up with Mike
Okay.
and Tim,
Mhm.
my two wonderful
Mhm.
brothers. And so they were, you know, they were older than me. You
Mhm.
know, I was this little
Yeah.
nuisance
Yeah.
in their lives, but their, you know, their wives are like my sisters. They've been a part of my life since I was a child.
Did you have a piano in the home?
Not when I was very young, and my parents bought a piano from a guy over by Mitchell somewhere between Shoals and Mitchell. They bought a piano for $50, and it weighed tons. It was one of those huge old, honky tonk pianos, and we got it somehow into our basement. And I had that. I had that for a while. I mean, as with most parents, they thought this was a phase that I would, quickly lose interest in. So they didn't want to invest very much money.
Yeah.
And then after that, we bought a piano from what was then the Titzer Funeral Home.
Sure.
And because they switched to having an organ and didn't want to have a piano in the funeral home anymore. So we had that piano for a while. And then we bought a new Baldwin in the 70s from Frederick's Music Store in Washington. And one of my nieces had that piano.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So you had said a moment ago that it's difficult for your parents because they knew they were going to lose you to music. Did they know when you were very young that this was going to be your path? I mean, were you that dedicated?
Well, every child thinks they know everything.
Right.
I wanted that. I wanted that I wanted to be an artist. I knew that. Janice Arnett here, who was the choral teacher at in the whole school system, grade school and high school when I was growing up, and Ed Hamilton to a certain degree, but Janice especially taught me piano from about age 8 until I was 12. And Janice, who was a wonderful piano teacher, said to my parents at that point, when I was about 12, she said, I've kind of taken him as far as I can, which, that too is an extraordinarily generous thing for a teacher to do, because if the teacher has to have themselves reflected in the student all the time, they never get to that point. So it was very, very generous thing. And she arranged for me to play for a couple of teachers at Indiana University in Bloomington in the summer of 1977. And I will never forget this. This explains my dad completely. I'll never forget being taken up there, and I hope I don't cry.
If you do, that's fine.
I was taken into a room in the round building of the music school on 3rd Street in Bloomington, and I played whatever I knew at that point. And one of the piano professors took us aside after I played and started talking to my dad about what I needed, and started talking about Brahms and Beethoven and Mozart and Bach and all of this stuff. And
to your dad?
To my dad. And I was sitting there, and how much I would need to practice every day, and how much of my high school work would have to be, set aside, and I couldn't play any sports, and all this stuff, this checklist of things. And it was, it was going to be a hardship for my parents, not only financially, but they were going to have to drive me to Bloomington. I was too young to drive. It was going to be it was a big ask. And my dad stopped this man mid-sentence very politely and said, "Sir, you are a professional, and you think that he has the ability to do this, and we're going to do whatever he needs. And I won't understand what you're talking about, and I don't need to." And that's my dad, our dad, in a nutshell. He was totally focused on his children having the life they want, not the life he wanted for them.
That's amazing.
And that, that is the luckiest kind of parent you can have.
At an advanced age, to where, as you said, he could be doing other things as far as retirement and what have you.
I was a lot of work for an older set of parents.
What did your dad do?
He was supposed to.
That's what I thought. Yeah. That's what I thought.
He had a rural route in Rutherford Township for years, and he took the job that his dad had had.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, together. I never knew my grandfather. Mike and Tony did know our grandfather. they, he took his dad's job. So between the two of them, they were the postman in Rutherford Township for almost 100 years.
Wow.
80 years. 80 years.
That's
roughly.
amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Did he retire from
Mhm.
as a postman?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, when I was in high school.
Did you have friends? I mean, did you
Oh,
consider
yeah.
yourself an outsider
Oh, well,
because you didn't get involved in a lot of the things that the kids did at the time?
a little bit. I mean, I was a very proud band member,
Mhm.
of LHS band, and
Yeah.
did a lot there. Was very involved with the chorus, and I played for the first musical that we ever produced at
What was it?
LHS, which was Oklahoma, in the fall of 1978.
I was there. Brent Hardwick.
Yep,
Was he not the one of
yep,
the leads?
he was
I
indeed
was there. It was it not at the
at the old
high school gym?
at the old gym.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
long before there was an
Yeah.
auditorium. Yeah. So, I mean, I was very involved in those things. I didn't feel really like an outsider
Mhm.
any more than any other, you know, musician in a basketball town would
Yeah.
feel like an outsider.
Mhm.
But I did have dear friends. Dick Larkin certainly
Yeah.
was one of them, especially when we were very young. Uh, Kathy Clements, I'll miss some of them, but I mean, your community, and when you are in the theater, your community becomes
Mhm.
the other people who are in the
Mhm.
theater. That's the big draw of uh, of being part of an arts organization. And it's a draw to this day, where I'm the artistic director of one of the biggest arts organizations in the
Right.
country. That's a community of people,
Mhm.
and what only I don't know. I mean, only 8 or 10 people can play basketball at one time,
Mhm.
or however many play. I'm showing
Right.
my stupidity. I don't know how many of them play.
Well, 8
But
to 10.
yeah, but hundreds of
Yeah.
people can be involved
Yeah.
in a band, in a chorus,
True.
in an orchestra,
That's
and
true.
a play.
Mhm.
And that was always very appealing to me.
Mhm.
That appeal of being in an ensemble.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So when you were 10 years old,
Yeah.
obviously music was in your future somewhere, but w- was there a specific profession? Was there a specific, I'm sorry, a specific something that you really wanted to do and you had in mind, and that's what you were going to work for at 10 years old?
Hmm. I don't think it was ever anything other
Mhm.
than being a musician, and that was amorphous at the time.
But being
I
a
didn't know what that
musician
meant.
means a lot of things, right?
Yes,
Encompasses a
that's
lot
what
of
I
things.
mean. It
Yeah.
doesn't,
Okay.
did it mean what it ended up
Mhm.
meaning for
Okay.
me? Because
Yeah.
I don't know that. I I I was very interested in photography and nature and history.
Mhm.
So I was pretty studious, I
Yeah.
would say. I was
Mhm.
pretty nerdy in that
Okay.
way.
Yeah.
Now, Dick Larkin and I were kind of Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer. I mean, we were I don't know how we lived to our teenage years, because
Mhm.
we were, they lived kind of at the edge of town at the
Mhm.
time,
Yeah.
was the edge of town. And so we were forever out in the country doing
Mhm.
stuff, and at the river, and in
Yeah.
Dawson. And I mean, we once jumped on a moving train
Yeah.
by their house to go to elementary school on the other side of town, and we jumped off
Mhm.
the train, the elementary school. Right.
Well, you must have been the person that Dick was talking about then when I just interviewed him for Getting to Know Your Indian Neighbor, and he said he can't remember a time when you two weren't friends.
All right.
But when I asked him what they did as kids, he wasn't specific, but he did say anything crazy,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
anything that was just out of this world. What's next? What's next? So you
Yes.
must have been one of those guys.
I was certainly one of those guys.
Yeah.
And because his family had home outfitters
Right.
and the Larkin Brothers store, we
Mhm.
were also forever playing in the store,
Okay.
and doing things that
Mhm.
Jerry and Inez were not too thrilled about.
Dick wrote an article. I know you've seen it. I shared it on Facebook and talked about your passion. But one thing I thought particularly interesting is he said that as a young child, you were playing the piano in Hilly's, I'll say
Oh,
bar, tavern, whatever it was, restaurant,
in
right?
Washington,
In
yeah,
Washington.
yeah.
Maybe it was a restaurant, but I know it was a tavern and a
Well, it
bar
was
too.
both, I
Yeah.
think. Yeah.
So I think he said, did he not, that they had to move, of course, the piano from maybe the bar into another room because, of course, you were underage. Well,
Yes, it was actually a little more complicated than
okay.
that. I was hired to play cocktail piano.
Okay. At what age?
I think I must have been 16 because I think
Okay.
I drove
Okay.
myself to
Okay.
Washington by
All right.
that point. I think,
Hmm.
but yes, I he paid really, really well. He paid in cash, and the story is slightly in reverse. I played the piano in the restaurant. Hilly's in
Hmm.
Washington was a restaurant, and the other side was a bar.
Okay.
But he had a party or a wedding party or something
Hmm.
in Hilly's one night, and he said,
Hmm.
"I want you in the bar to play for the wedding uh,
Hmm.
rehearsal dinner or whatever it was." And so I did. I did what I was told, and then somebody mentioned to him that I wasn't old enough to be in
Okay.
the bar, and so he realized he had an illegal employee.
Yeah.
And I think that was kind of the end of my cocktail piano
Ah,
career.
yeah.
But
Well,
yes, I did play at Hilly's for
mhm.
a couple of years.
Did you have other paid engagements as a teen?
A lot of weddings,
A lot of
a
weddings.
lot of weddings.
Hmm.
I started working in doing music direction for shows
Hmm.
around the area. At Civic Theater in Washington was especially
Hmm.
important
Right.
for me, which wasn't professional, but you were paid a little bit. So
Right.
I was,
Hmm. So Janice Arnett,
yeah,
you mentioned her,
yeah,
um, and I know how important. Well, I don't know, but I know she's very important to you.
extraordinarily
So
so. Yeah,
talk a little bit about more. Why is that? What did she do that lit that fire in you?
Janice, um, she had there were struggles to get the choral program at LHS going at all. She started the choral
Hmm.
program. And of course, choruses don't perform at sporting events.
Right.
It's a whole different world. It was a struggle for her, and I came along I would have gone into high school in, I guess, 1978, something like that, maybe 77. I graduated in 81,
Right.
obviously, so however long that was. And and I could play the piano well by that point, and so I think for her, she she was happy to have a student that shared some passion for music, and I loved the chorus, and she was really influential on getting me to be a better pianist.
Hmm.
She was really, really. She spent so much time, sometimes 2 or 3 hours uh, after school, for which, I'm sure we paid her to teach me, but
Right.
nothing like the
Right.
time she actually put
She
down.
must have seen
So,
what she had hoped she would see at some point, and that's somebody who obviously has the passion that she does.
mhm.
Right.
Yeah, and I found her a really, really dedicated,
Hmm.
smart, quiet teacher.
Did you sing?
I did sing a little bit, not very well,
No.
but yeah. I mean, I understand
Hmm.
singing, and I deal still every day in my professional life
Hmm.
with, very gratefully, the greatest singers in the world.
Yeah.
But no, I'm not much of
So I'm thinking
singing
back
myself.
to Oklahoma,
Mm.
and obviously, like you said, 1978. So
Fall
the
of '78.
fall of '78. So the technology wasn't what it is today. Were you playing the piano, or
I did.
was you
I
did?
did.
You did. Did you play a character as well, or
No,
just the
no.
piano?
I played the piano for the whole score.
How challenging was that?
I don't remember it
Okay.
being challenging at
Okay.
all, but I remember loving it a
Hmm.
lot. Ed Hamilton had a small band there to play the overture
Hmm.
and to play a couple of other things, but mostly everything was done with piano.
Hmm. And you were off the stage, I would
Yeah,
assume.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Um, it was very exciting. There'd never been a show
Mhm.
produced
So that was
here.
the first one.
Yes, yeah.
Hmm.
Gretchen Stewart directed it.
Okay.
Janice was the music director, and I was the pianist. Yeah, and nobody had ever. There had been no. Well, there was no theater, and there were no lighting instruments. There was no
Hmm.
scenery. There was no. We had to just do everything.
Yeah.
It was very exciting. It was like Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney.
And so let's see, '78, you would have been, well, you would have been
14.
yeah, I'm just thinking, though, you would have been a freshman at the time.
Yeah, I guess so.
So,
Yeah.
so what were the other plays? '78, '9, '80, '81.
Gosh, you're testing my
Yeah.
memory. I think 79 was the Music Man.
Okay, that might be too.
I think.
I'm trying to think of mine because I went to them. You know, it was very entertaining.
Yeah.
I loved it.
And my senior year, I know we did Anything Goes, Cole Porter,
Uh-huh.
and we did Our Town. I played the stage manager in Our Town.
Okay.
All in the Our Town was right before graduation. It was in the spring. And I remember the day of the last performance of Our Town, I won a piano competition in Evansville. And that was like, I don't know, took us into the late afternoon. And my dad finally remembered that there's a time change or something.
Oh, yeah.
And I had to get back to be in the play.
Mm-hmm.
And it was rush, 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 rush. And I remember I remember getting back here that night, and the famous first line of Thornton Wilder's Our Town. The name of this play is Our Town. Famous first line. I said the name of this town is Our Play. Yes, because I was so flustered at being late.
Do you think the audience knew?
No, I doubt it.
I don't think so.
That was the merciful end of my acting career.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. So
Yeah,
it was
yeah.
there, apparently then there was no serious consideration for going into acting.
No. I see what real actors,
Mm-hmm.
the kind of talent they have and the work they go through. That wasn't me at all. I was I was a musician. I'm somewhat a writer, but yeah, music is the language of my life.
Mm-hmm.
There's no question about that. I view everything through the lens of that, and actually always did. I mean, even from the time I was very, very young, and I was attracted to uh, extraordinary voices and extraordinary music. That always drew me in. I appreciate all kinds of music and like it, but it's not where it's not that magic carpet ride that that opera has become for me,
Right.
and all of the vast world of classical music that I'm still learning so much about. I mean, I'm amazed every month that I uncover a whole set of things I never knew about. It's an extraordinary part of the spiritual life of humanity. What music has brought into the world. It's quite an extraordinary thing. It's been the whole focus of my life.
Do you ever get to schools and because you have that passion and you know your path, do you have an opportunity to get to schools and talk about that passion?
Yeah,
Okay.
I do, and I fulfill a lot of passion for teaching at the Aspen Music Festival, where I'm a co-director with Renee Fleming, with the soprano Renee Fleming of the opera program. And you know, we've got a extraordinarily elite set of gifted students there, and so gifted, and so I get a lot of joy from teaching them.
Were you that gifted? When you talk about a lot of gifted, you were one of those. Do you consider yourself now that you were one of those gifted people?
No,
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 not as much.
no. There are a lot of advantages to coming from a small town, but one of the disadvantages is that I was very painfully shy and insecure for a very long time. Felt to me like a long time. Really, until I left IU and went to San Francisco Opera, did I realize that, oh, I might really be able to do this. And my career from 1986, when I left Indiana, my career went fast. It didn't feel fast at the time.
Yeah.
I thought, oh, come on.
Wow.
But it went fast at the time, and I had my debut at the Metropolitan Opera Christmas Eve 1998, so 12 years after I left college. And the next month, I started my tenure at Houston Grand Opera, January of 1999, the very next month. And I have it brings up a memory for me of driving with my mother, with Grace, driving to my first performance at Houston Grand Opera. I conducted Verdi's La Traviata. And she was in the car with me. We were driving down to the theater in downtown Houston, and I pulled into my parking space, and it said reserved. And Mom said, "You can't park here. It's reserved." And I said, "It's reserved for
Yeah.
me."
Mhm.
And she kind of, had a light bulb moment.
Mhm.
It was very funny. It's
Yeah.
very sweet. It was
So
very her.
yeah, so you were at the Jacob School of Music, which is famed, obviously. I assumed even at that
Yeah,
stage,
yeah.
it
It
was
was a
very
pretty
elite.
dazzling place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But before you could finish school, I understand that your dad passed.
Yeah, yeah, just before. Yeah,
Mhm.
in the spring of '86. He died in April. Yeah,
Yeah, so he never really got to see you
not
take
really.
off.
No, not
Yeah.
really. No.
Um, I'm sure you had performances though at IU.
Yeah,
Was he able to
yes.
get to them?
Yeah, he enjoyed
Hmm.
it.
He did.
He enjoyed it.
He
Yeah.
did.
It was it was out of their
Yeah.
experience, but they were
Hmm.
very open,
Yeah.
generous people.
Yeah.
Very, very. I
Hmm.
mean, they were just good people. I mean,
Hmm.
you know, really, really deeply good human beings, both of them.
Yeah.
And I tell you, that counts for a great deal.
Sure.
I've seen I've seen so much over the course of now more than 30 years in the profession, and trying to help others come into the profession.
Hmm.
And there's an enormous amount of talent, and there's an enormous amount of great training. But the thing that makes the difference is your parents. I've seen so many people who just couldn't break the cycle of a bad parent,
Hmm.
and nobody can overcome that.
Right.
And so I mean the forever gratitude I will feel for growing up in a place where many people had parents like that.
Hmm.
They were just generous, good people.
So your mother was able to follow your career,
Yeah, for a long
but it sounds like by your parking lot story
time.
that she really didn't understand the magnitude of what you had accomplished at that point. Is that fair? Yeah.
Maybe so. I think she was very modest, shy person
Hmm.
herself. So it was not in her nature
Hmm.
to go into a reserved parking spot.
Yeah.
But I do remember I conducted on the Kennedy Center Honors
Mm.
one
Wow.
year when I conducted the tribute to Andre Previn
Oh my.
at his invitation.
Okay.
So I took Mom to. She was my guest for the Kennedy Center
Okay.
Honors. So for the honors ceremony, and the night before the honors ceremony is taped in the Kennedy Center.
Hmm.
There's a dinner at the State Department,
Yeah.
and the Secretary of State confers the Kennedy Center honors. It's a State Department honor.
Hmm.
So that was Madeleine Albright
Oh my.
at that.
Yeah.
She was the host of that dinner, and we were seated at that dinner, and uh, uh, at the table next to us was Jack Lemmon, and my mother simply walked over to Jack Lemmon and said, "I've loved your movies all my life, and my name's Grace Summers,
Mhm.
and I'm his mother." And they talked for 5, 10 minutes.
That's amazing.
And my
Yeah.
mother introduced me to Jack Lemmon.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
to see her experience that
Mhm.
was thrilling.
What would your dad thought about all of that? Would he be comfortable in those type of scenarios?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. There would have been, it's one of the things that plagues the arts is that
Hmm.
sometimes what keeps people from enjoying what they might enjoy
Right.
is the feeling that I don't really belong there, you know. And that's a feeling I try constantly to combat,
Hmm.
certainly in Houston and everywhere, because it's an elitist sort of image that is hard to combat because there's so many uh, films like Pretty Women where they, dress up and go to the opera and things like that. And that's one version of
Hmm.
the experience of the arts, but there are a lot of other ways to experience that. So I don't know if he would have been comfortable in those surroundings, but he would have tried it because he knew it was important to me.
Have you been able to perform locally? When I say locally, IU or
I have done a couple of
Indianapolis
things.
or
I have
anything
done.
coming up?
Uh, Gosh, I don't know. I mean, not in the
Uh-huh.
immediate term.
Yeah.
We're still in pandemic recovery, so
Okay.
there's a
Yeah.
lot of there's been just so much rescheduling of events that were canceled
Hmm.
for almost 2 years
Yeah.
during the pandemic, classical music, everyone was hit hard by the pandemic. The live performing arts, not only classical music, was hit particularly hard because we are, you know, singers spread particulates and all of those things. The spreading around of air of certain instruments was a particular danger. So we've been slow to come back. So that's part of.
What about today? Is it pretty well back?
It's getting there.
Getting there?
Yeah, it's getting. Yeah, it's certainly better than a couple of years ago when no one thought it may ever come back. But yeah, it's better. It's better now.
So let's circle back to where we started a little bit earlier, going over to China and exposing them to an art form they've never seen, opera.
At that time.
At that time, and that would have been
1987.
87
was the first time.
So why go over there in the first place? For that very reason?
I went there as part of an exchange program between San Francisco Opera, where I was employed at the time, and the Shanghai Conservatory. And Shanghai and San Francisco were sister cities, were international sister cities, and there was a lot of cultural exchange at that time. Cultural exchange is not a term you hear much now, but at that point, 10 years after the Cultural Revolution had ended, and about a little more than a decade after Mao's death, there was a big push in China for the arts. And the Shanghai Conservatory that I found in 1987, now, of course, it's a gleaming set of high-rises and very, very sleek. In 1987, it was still in recovery from the Cultural Revolution. They were still digging up violins and pianos that had been buried under floorboards to be saved from the Red Guards. I mean, it was quite extraordinary. And the talent was just, so magnificent. So I was suddenly in a world where I had gone from my world of supportive parents in a small town in Indiana and the privilege of having gone to a major music school when I was a teenager. Extraordinary privilege. I had gone from that to suddenly flying across the Pacific, and I was with singers especially, but all kinds of instrumentalists who could take none of that for granted. And it really altered the view of what I had been privileged with. And I went yearly till about 94, still always as part of the San Francisco Opera's exchange program. And I conducted the first performances of the Puccini opera Tosca that were ever produced in Asia in 1988. I conducted several operas over there. And conducting is a mysterious art. I think people don't always understand. Even a lot of conductors don't understand what that is. We unlock music for people. We first have to unlock music for ourselves so that we can do that for fellow performers and hopefully for an audience. So that the task of that in China at that time, not now, it's very, very different now, but the task of that at that time was epically difficult, but thus also epically rewarding. It was such a moving and transformative experience.
So particularly your first operas over there were well received?
Yeah.
Were they starving for something like that?
Yeah, I think so. Now, of course, China has the world's most technologically advanced opera houses and major training and major contributors to the international world of all kinds of things. So it's a very, very different world now. That world changed very, very fast. Yeah. But music, by and large, has been an apolitical activity. And what you discover in China is what has been true throughout all of history, that artists find their way to the art, no matter what kind of political regime they may be living under, or how oppressive or detrimental that may have been to their
Mhm.
lives. And I find that that's a very moving part of the world too. You know, they find something that will help them overcome those things.
So you flew in from Aspen, Colorado
Today, yeah.
today.
Or last night, yeah.
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 Again, as we record this, I guess this is Saturday, July 30th, for the alumni banquet. Patrick will be awarded the Outstanding Alumnus Award tonight. But first of all, thanks so much for doing that. Thanks so much for doing this. But I mean, we all knew that there was a chance the travel, weather,
Yeah.
delays might get a little
Yesterday
involved.
was a
So
little bit,
tell me a little bit about your travels in the last 24 hours.
well, Aspen, Colorado, I mean, yeah, a place of extraordinary privilege, you
Right,
know, and
right.
millionaire, billionaire central. But it has a very small airport.
Uh-huh.
There are only 4 gates.
Okay.
You know, it's tiny.
Mm-hmm.
And when I arrived at the airport yesterday at about 3 o'clock Colorado time, there were 4 flights that were supposed to go from Aspen to Denver, where I was connecting to fly to Indianapolis. And I was the last flight of the day, like at 3:30. None of the flights had gone. There were still people there from a 7:15 a.m. flight
Okay.
who were still waiting there. And so I thought, well, I just will never, I'm not going. You know, I'm not going to be able to get there because my flight was delayed and I wouldn't make the Denver Indianapolis connection, etc. So this man at the check-in desk, I said, my high school class is honoring me tomorrow, and if I can possibly get to Denver today, that would be really great because I was the last flight out of Denver.
Did he know you at all?
I don't know.
No.
I think
Or maybe.
I don't know.
Okay.
And I knew if I had to wait to fly today, I would almost not make it. It just wouldn't work.
Sure.
And by some miracle, I think this guy had been screamed at all day.
Sure.
It's the worst. People behave so badly when those things happen. He said, "Well, the 7:15 flight is going to leave in 15 minutes. 7 or 8 hours late, and I'm going to put you on it." So he did, and I didn't even have time to text everybody. I got on that flight, and of course made my Denver Indianapolis flight, and I got in late to Indianapolis. I drove down here today.
Yeah. Your friend Dick Larkin, it's funny because it relates to that story that you're just talking about. And when you texted, you did say a bunch of grumpy millionaires, right, in Aspen. Well,
They're
Dick,
not used to being told they can't go somewhere.
No, but Dick detailed for us some of the history of his family, and I'm going back into the mid 1800s and later, and some of the strife that they had to go through. And he just pointed out that I will never ever complain if my flight is late or something like that. So
Yeah,
that's funny how it relates to. It's almost impossible not to do, but
I didn't complain. I just said,
that's why you got on.
I said, if there is a way to get me to Denver, that would be great. And it was too late for me to drive to Denver. If I'd known earlier, I could have. Anyway.
Well, tell me about your responsibilities in Aspen with the music festival in particular. And I know you're the artistic director of the Aspen Opera Theater. So
I'm the co-director of the opera program with Renee Fleming, with the great American soprano Renee Fleming. And she and I were asked about this 4 or 5 years ago. And we've worked together since the 80s she's the one
with the Grammy?
With the Grammy, yes. And we did many, many operas and concert tours together. We did, I think, 3 concert tours in Europe together, 4 or 5 concert tours in the United States together. We've done a lot together over the years. So partially it was a chance to keep working together, as we get older. But it was also a chance to reimagine a training program for opera singers, a summer training program that is something that bridges their conservatory school life with their professional life, which is really what we're wanting to design. And it's been wonderful to do that with her and to be a deeper part of the festival. I've been teaching at the Aspen Festival, teaching conducting and conducting myself for almost 20 years, and I love it. It's a place of extraordinary youthful energy. The best musicians, best young musicians in the world, audition from all over the world to come together for the 8 weeks of the Aspen Festival. and their energy is really amazing,
Yeah.
amazing. So it's I'm enjoying it.
How much time do you spend in Aspen?
2 months.
2 months.
July and August.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, where do you make your home?
I live in Houston, Texas.
In Houston.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I've lived there on and off, mostly on, since 1998.
Okay. Did you live in San Francisco?
I did. I lived in San Francisco from 1986 to 1988. Sorry, 1986 to 98. 12 years.
So what's next for you? Is there anything that you haven't done that you've got to do before you get out of this, or is this a lifelong? There's no retirement in it, as long as the passion is there.
Well, things change, of course. Your passions change, but there came a time in my 30s. I remember, uh, I had dreamed of doing a lot of things, and there was a lot of repertoire I wanted to get to. There were a lot of operas I wanted to get to, and then where I'll be 59 in a couple of weeks. Uh, I've done hundreds of operas and many things. You have to redream. You got to dream all over again. And that's a very privileged, grateful place to be. But I've got a lot left that I want to do. Yeah, I've got a number of things I want to go back to and conduct better than I did before.
Okay.
I've got a lot I want to write, and I'm really enjoying shepherding a new generation of artists into this field.
You mentioned writing. How difficult it is for you to even find the time to be devoted to writing?
Yeah, it is hard. It's time consuming to be a good writer.
Right.
But it's also very rewarding. Writing has informed my music making a lot. And I've written more in the last 5 years. The pandemic helped. I've written more in the last 5 years than in the whole earlier part of my life. So it's clearly something that's emerging naturally.
Patrick, typically on my little shows here, we give the guest just kind of an open forum. Anything that I didn't ask that you'd like to add, or thanks. I know you've got a grateful supporting cast tonight as you receive the outstanding Lagote alumnus, but and obviously I'm not an intellect enough to ask some of the questions that maybe I should. But is there anything that our people watching right now should know that we didn't talk about?
Gosh, I think the most important thing in life is learning, and to cherish the teachers who will open doors to you that you didn't know about. And I think that I was very blessed at a time of childhood here where there were a number of those teachers, Florence Olson and Anna Mae Porter and certainly Janice Mayer. And I think those teachers need to be extraordinarily treasured. And I'm just so grateful for them, and grateful for having parents who let their children be who they were.
Yeah. So I'm guessing that from time to time, when you get a chance to reflect, you'll look back at a kid from Martin County where typically we're not exposed to the arts maybe as much, and you just wonder, why me? Why you? Why you were kind of the chosen one, I guess, in the area, because it's just not an opportunity that many people here get. Or do we get it and we don't take advantage of it?
That I don't know. I do know, though, that I sought it out. I went looking for it, and so having that dream is a really important thing, and following the voice that is telling you to dream about that. That's important to do, and it's hard to do because, it's the advantage of a small town is that you have a community and it's supportive, but you have to be sure it's supportive of of who you actually are.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Patrick, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Congratulations on
Thank
the
you.
award that you'll receive in just a couple of hours,
Oh,
presented by your good friend Dick Larkin. We
Thank
look forward to that. And safe travels.
Yeah, we'll see if I can get back to Colorado.
Thanks so much, Patrick. That's Patrick Summers, and that's getting to know your Indiana neighbor. Now I know you know a lot more about this phenomenon, I guess, if you will. Patrick Summers, thank you for watching.